Okay, so now without any further ado, please allow me to give the floor to Dr. Kaur. He will make a short presentation on the ASEAN+3 regional economic outlook, and then he and Dr. Ong will address your questions. Once again, please type in your questions in the chat box. Dr. Kaur, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Let me share my slides now. Okay, so as Pinky said, this is an update of our flagship report, which came out in April, and I encourage you to read through our update carefully. This will be coming out, I guess, after the press conference. And if you had a chance to look at the previous one, you'll see the big difference between this and the last one. And this is our regional report, so I'm very glad to see so many of you in this press conference. This is probably our first regional press conference. So the COVID-19 has forced us to all go online, and there's some positive side effect as well. So today I'm going to I think there have been, if you compare the two reports, the update with the previous, you see a very substantial changes. Even while we were doing the flagship report, we constantly update the forecast. But now it's been about 3-4 months since we issued the last report. So since then, of course, we have moved to a slightly different phase in terms of the outlook. So I'll take you through that in the next few minutes. As you know, the region has been hit by a very infectious virus, which has spread across the world and has taken a toll on almost all the countries in the world. Governments have taken strict social distancing measures, locked down the economies in order to prevent the virus from spreading. But these measures have taken a toll on the economy. It has led to massive unemployment. It has caused disruption in the supply chain, the businesses. And so governments have had to respond by taking very large stimulative measures to support the economies, right? So they have provided cash income to households, to businesses. They have allowed for debt moratorium. They have provide tax relief. So all kinds of measures, basically to make sure to prevent a liquidity crisis from developing into a solvency crisis, because businesses have no income during the lockdown period, and without the relief from the government or financial support from the government, many of them will be forced to go bust. But at the same time, these are very costly to the budget. So many countries have had in that very large fiscal have had to run very large fiscal deficit, and there's concern about whether their fiscal space and whether financing is available. So governments are really struggling and trying to juggle the tension between how much financial assistance they can provide the economy, and at the same time locking down the economy long enough in order to make sure that they get the virus under control. But but the virus, but in the last few months, we also learned a lot about the virus. For a while, we thought the virus has been contained, but as soon as the countries begin to open up, we see that the virus has started sprouting up in some of them. So it's been a real challenge for many countries to try to lock down, because as I mentioned earlier, the cost of locking down is very high. But at the same time, if you start to leave it too soon, you get the risk of a second wave of infection. So let me now take you to the first slide. Okay, this slide basically shows the active number of cases across the world, right? And you can see that there was a spike in the infection rate in March when it spread across to Europe and the US, and then it seems to have leveled off. But then since May, it has started to rise up again, and it seems hopefully it's peaking here, although it's very hard to tell. because it may we may see another spike up here because some countries still doesn't seem to have flattened the curve yet. And you can see from the chart here, this part here is Latin America. That's a new hot spot. This is North America, and that's mainly because of the US, because they had a second wave after they seemed to have flattened off. It came up again. Um, this one here is Europe. Europe, as you know, had a big spike wave in March, and they seem to flatten it, and it seems to be still holding. Although more recently, several European countries have experienced outbreaks again. And the red one is the Middle East, and then here we have other Asian countries. This is mostly India. Infection rate is still rising. And this is the ASEAN+3 region. Very seems to be just a tiny sliver at the bottom here. There was a bit of spike here, and this was China, and now it seems to have flattened off. So we blow it up, and this is what we see. China was here, and seems to have been successfully contained the virus, but the rest of the region is still struggling. And as you can see, while most of the countries have managed to keep flatten the curve and reduce the infection rate. The two countries here in particular that are still, infection rate is still rising. One of them is Indonesia, this is the red line here, and the other one is the Philippines. A sudden spike up just yesterday or the day before. So the virus has turned out to be very tenacious and hard to contain. And so I think the challenge is going to be quite protracted, and we really need the vaccine in order to contain this. Okay, we usually look at the risk of confronting the region when we make an assessment of the outlook. So these are the bubbles represent the different types of risk. And this is the probability of the risk, whether it's a low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And this is the how, in terms of imminence, whether they're short term, medium term, or long term. And at the moment, we are looking at, I think this is probably the most important risk, the recurring outbreak of the pandemic. Because if that happens, and we had another second or third wave, it's going to maybe cause the global economy to go into another downturn, and it'll be much more protracted, and that will have spillover effect on the region. And on the left-hand side, this is a trade tension between the US and China, which is still ongoing and doesn't seem to have subsided. Down here, we have some financial risk because obviously the lockdown has caused serious damage to the balance sheet of the corporates and the household sectors. And after in the recovery period, authorities are going to have to take measures to try to resolve some of these non-performing loans and all that. And if there's another downturn, it's going to cause even more distress to the corporate balance sheet. And on the other hand, another lockdown will also be very costly because it means the government will have to support the economy for longer, the debt will be higher, and for some of the countries, they may run into a sovereign debt crisis. As I mentioned, countries in the region are beginning to open up. These are the mobility data from Google, I believe, and it shows that basically the lockdown sort of trough in around April, and then economies begin to slowly open up. So this is the Northeast Asia, the +3 countries, and you can see that most of them didn't have a very major lockdown. In Wuhan, of course, we know it's complete lockdown. So the mobility was never very seriously affected. Hong Kong, Japan, and Korea in particular. The CLMV countries have very low cases of infection, and they were able to open up much earlier. Whereas the ASEAN+5, were hit by a very the infection a bit later, and many of them are still struggling, as I mentioned earlier. So they're opening up, but more slowly than the others. And on this side, you can see that for China, they were the first one to be hit, and they have since come out of it. And this shows that basically track has recovered to normal. This is the chart showing the mobility. Yeah. So basically they recovered to the mean. Okay, so these are the leading indicators of production of manufacturing and services. Let me just. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so you can see on the manufacturing side that the heat map, what we call heat map, and they were pretty green in 2018. They started turning yellow, red, and orange in 2019, and but towards the end of 2019, they were turning around, and then got hit by the pandemic, and everything turns red. Right? You can see that. But now we begin to see signs of green and yellow again. So this is a reflecting the opening up, the easing of the restrictions, and production is coming back to manufacturing again. Uh, Similarly, on the services side, you can see the services side was still green in 2019. They were not hit as badly as manufacturing because manufacturing was hit by the trade war between US and China and the imposition of tariff. But then it turned suddenly very red in February, March, right, when the pandemic hit. But again, we are seeing signs of recovery here. You see strips of yellow here. Uh, so you can see that the recovery is happening. Some of them faster than others. The economy is very diverse, and they and structure the economy uh, would and would affect the pace of the recovery as well as the infection rate as well. This is the equity market and the bond market. As markets have basically recovered. They were hit by a massive outflow back in March. So you can see these large outflows here. But since then, the flows have subsided, and you can even see some inflows into the region, both on the equity side and also the bond side. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, governments have had to take very large stimulative measures to support the economy, and but the countries are very diverse, and the policy space vary from country to country, and the extent to which they were hit by the infection. You can see here that Japan has the largest package, about over 40% of GDP. But Japan is much closer, is an advanced economy, closer to US and Europe, where the packages are about similar in magnitude. The other countries in the region, the size of the package varies from Malaysia and Singapore, about 20%, to about 10, and down to the CLMV countries here, Myanmar and Laos, where the package is relatively small, but there the infection rate has been very well controlled. But nevertheless, despite it's average about 11% of GDP, and it's a big increase from the traditional fiscal deficit they were running. And as you know, the region has been relatively prudent, conservative in terms of fiscal policy. So, unfortunately, because of that, they have built up a policy space, and they are now able to use it to support the economy during this. But as I mentioned, if the pandemic goes on for too long, they run out of fiscal space, and that's a big concern for us. On the right side, we see that central bank have also responded to cutting interest rate, and the rate cuts vary from country to country depending on how much policy space they have. Uh, but so both the central bank and the Ministry of Finance have taken measures to support the economy, and they have also let me go to the next one. Taken forbearance measure to allow the banks to give debt moratorium to their customers, especially the corporates and small businesses that are unable to service the debt. So these are the measures that have been taken on the fiscal, monetary, and the financial side. As you can see, on the fiscal side, a lot of cash transfers, wage subsidies, moratorium on debt payments. On the monetary policy side, they have also provided low-cost loans to SMEs. Actually, this is this is mostly coming from the fiscal side, the debt, the credit guarantee we call it. The central banks have cut interest rate, and they have also cut the reserve requirement to provide liquidity. And some of them have even gone into the market to buy government securities and corporate bonds. On the financial side, they have allowed for forbearance, as I mentioned earlier, and more flexible treatment of non-performing loans. So this is our forecast for growth in the region. There's this gray bar is the zone of uncertainty or ignorance. And you can see it's a very wide range of estimate in the private sector. Our own estimate is somewhere in the middle. So we are basically seeing zero growth. Growth has collapsed from 4.8% to 0.1%. And for the ASEAN countries, it's gone from 4.6 to negative 2.3. So a swing of almost 7 percentage point for the region. And you can see here that many of the countries are going to have very large recession. And that depends very much on the structure of the economy and how successful they were in terms of containing the virus. But even when the most successful country, some of the more successful, like Thailand, is going to be hit by the lockdown. And so they're going to have, we're estimating negative growth of 7.8%. That's because of the structural economy. They're very much very open, dependent on tourism, and also on the auto industry, which has been hit very badly during this pandemic. So as you can see, so this is the first time the region is going to be hit by a negative growth, I think, since the Asian financial crisis. But next year, we're hoping for a strong rebound. We're expecting the pandemic to be relatively contained by the second half of this year, and for the economy to bounce back next year. So for the region as a whole, 6.6% growth, and for ASEAN, 5.7. 5.7, there'll still be an output gap because 5.7 will not take you back to the trend growth rate. So it will take another year probably before the region fully recover back to pre-COVID level of activity.